So I'm making this short video to celebrate reaching 1,000 subscribers, and as a special treat I've extracted the entire terrain analysis section from the next Hill 112 video. This segment had slowly ballooned and was wrecking the pace and focus of the 4 Dorsets attack on Eterville, so I've decided it would be better to present in its entirety as a standalone piece. So the terrain for this mission is pretty much like what we've already seen, with lots of open ground leading up to the village, and then the village itself being lots of close terrain. In terms of the elevation though, it's slightly different, so whereas before we were going uphill the whole way, this time we've sort of got a brow of a hill to crest, and then we go downhill into the actual village itself. So looking westward from the forming up point, you can see it sort of rises up towards the farm buildings, plateaus for a while, and then as we're approaching the village it sort of dips back down till it hits the tree line. It remains relatively flat, so that's the first objective, the church. And then it sort of rises out towards the village and up towards the Khan Eversea Road to the south. And then looking eastward you get a similar appreciation. It's probably harder than looking westward because with that view you get the sort of profile looking cut through the terrain, but you still get a similar idea of its rolling countrysides basically. You can also sort of appreciate looking east into the village. There's quite a lot of tree line, so that makes it quite difficult to get eyes in. So terrain analysis itself can be a bit tricky, especially in the game that I'm playing. And so in real life what you would typically do would be a mixture of looking at a map and actually getting into a position where you can look at the ground. And you can sort of do that with the game, but it's mostly the second part. So a lot of what it is getting down to ground level, skimming around the map and trying to identify the features on the land. But it's a little bit tricky because you don't have that extra bit of like a detailed topographical map. And so with this one, what I've managed to do, because it's a real location, is a sort of blend between skimming around the map and also looking at an actual map and looking at the actual ground. So it's not perfect and things have changed, which I'll come to at the end, but I suppose the first thing that we're looking at from the approach to the village is very, very open countryside. It's absolutely flat fields covered in crops, and that leads all the way up to sort of the tree edge that you have on the village. And it very, very quickly goes from very, very open terrain to very, very close terrain. So you hit that tree wall and very, very quickly you are in close country. You've then got, so on the map you've got a central road that leads up towards the actual village itself from that tree line. So this is the representation in the game, and we can sort of start skimming along. You hit the first building on the side there, so in real life that is about here, and it sort of leads into, so in real life it leads into the church building, which in real life became a sort of covered point for the battalion's headquarters. And then again it leads all the way up towards the back of the village, where it reaches a sort of T-junction. And then we're at the T-junction here, and that's looking west, and that goes off towards the actual chateau itself. So this is the chateau looking, so the right hand side of this is looking back to the east. But I am conscious that this is 80 years later, so you have to acknowledge that whilst we can skim around, the time has moved on. And so for instance this sort of stout farm building that was part of the defences here, that's no longer there anymore. It's now a new build because life moves on. And beyond that, it's also become apparent that much of the commune was ultimately destroyed. I'd looked to see if I could try and find this building, for example, and it just doesn't seem to be there anymore. But yeah, in terms of combat mission, it can be tricky. You can certainly, as I say, go around at ground level, having a look. You can certainly have waypoints that you put out, and then from those waypoints you can draw lines of sight, but they're very specific, and it can be quite a slow process. So combat mission, as much as I love it, can be a bit harder to actually do terrain analysis. So in the end, what I did was I tried to think about how other games handle it, the tools that they provide, and tried to think about how I could match them. So one of the other games I sort of play now and again is Armoured Brigade, and this has got a really nice line of sight tool. So it gives you a generalized picture of the line of sight, and then it also gives you a specific point line of sight. So whilst you can see generally how the terrain is, where you can see, where you can't see, until you click on a specific point on the map, you only get the generalized view. When you click on that point, it gives you this really, really nice line of sight tool where you can drag that across the map, and it basically shows you almost like a CT scan side-on view cutting through the hills. So that lets you see the dead ground. You can start to understand what the terrain looks like, what may block your views, and how the hills affect you. They've also got a heat view, so this reminds me a little bit of Harvey's maps. So when I went hiking, you typically have your Ordnance Survey, Harvey's maps, all these different ones. With Harvey's maps, what they've got for the contour lines is a sort of subtle changes in colour, and that allows you to see more visually what the terrain looks like in terms of rising hills. And again, when you use this in the 3D view, it sort of highlights those terrain features and the contours. So with terrain analysis, map analysis, what you're looking for is the terrain features. So from the contours, you have the valleys, the re-entrance, or draws as the American players call them, spurs, all those sort of land features which you can try and use to your advantage. And then another game that I've got is Flashpoint Campaigns. So this is a hex strategy game, and this allows you to, with the unit overlay, you can see the line of sight, range rings, and as well it's got this really useful thing called the modified combined obstacle overlay. So what that gives you is a view of the terrain sort of broken down into slow go, no go for mobility. It's got highlighting your roads, your towns, your bridges, and it's a really, really useful way to see how you will be channeled through a map. I suppose to get to the point, why am I waffling on about this? And the real purpose really is to show one thing I came up with on the next mission actually, which is taking the mission editor, looking at the actual ground and the elevation from there, and trying to project that in the same sort of heat map way to sort of visually see what the land looks like. So the first step I took was to load the scenario in the editor and go straight to the map. You can switch to the elevation mode, and what you do is write down the heights that appear as contour lines. And these, once you note them down, are taken to Excel sheet. In the end, to be honest, I figured out you just need the highest and lowest values, which you can fill the numbers in between, and you order them small to large. Once you've done that, you can apply conditional formatting, and you can either use a sort of heat map or traffic light approach to how these are coloured. And then you can screen grab that and drop it onto a photo editor. So I was using a free online program called Pixlr. In a separate layer, I dropped the screenshots of the map, merging multiple captures if necessary, and then it sort of becomes a paint by numbers. So you're switching between the game and the editor to fill in the contour colours. Once completed, I found that you can set the layer blend mode to something like colour and adjust the opacity to your preference. And there you go, so you end up with a heat mapped version of the game map, which might help you identify features of the map such as hill shapes, saddles, valleys, re-entrance, spurs and cliffs.